Hi guys, today I'll be taking a look at this, the Roccat Vulcan 122 AIMO with Roccat Titan Tactile switches. Let's get started. Now this keyboard as well as its black variant, the 121, was released in 2019, with the 121 still on sale today, but it's been out of stock for a while now. In its place is this, the Roccat Vulcan 2, which is more or less the exact same thing with very similar specs, so I'm not exactly sure what they've changed with the new one. Also, as a side note, Roccat went defunct in 2024, they were acquired by Turtle Beach, hence why the pictures I've shown you say Turtle Beach at the top of them. Now, pricing wise, this keyboard retails for £150 on Turtle Beach's website, placing this on the upper range. Now, moving on to the switches, these are the Roccat Titan Tactile. They were made in collaboration with TTC. You know, the same company who's responsible for making the weirdest switches I've reviewed. Now, these switches are also quite weird. They have a completely different housing that I've never seen before. I'm not sure why they couldn't just go for a more traditional housing, but that could be something to do with Roccat. Now, let's move on to the keyboard characteristics. Now, the base is made of plastic and the top is made of aluminium. This combo was very common back then and is still quite common today, with the Vulcan 2 sporting the same thing. Now, in terms of dimensions, the keyboard is 46 cm long, 23 cm wide and 3 cm tall with the feet extended. It also weighs 1.16 kg, which is quite light for a full-size keyboard. Now, moving on to the keycaps, they are very thin and laser ablated. It's a cheap manufacturing method, but it's also not great for any kind of longevity. As you can see, my left shift key and enter keys are already showing signs of wear, and over time this will happen to the rest of the keycaps. Although not everything is doom and gloom, the cable is at least braided, which they could have cheaped out on, but they didn't. And they included a cable tie to keep things nice and tidy. Look. Overall, apart from the keycaps, it's a solid keyboard, and since the switches use the MX mount, you can put whatever keycaps you want on them. 7 out of 10. Now, one of its selling features is Easy Shift, which essentially is another layer. However, there's so many issues with it. Firstly, you need to be in game mode for it to work, which I think defeats the whole point of a macro. So, as a quick demo, you need to press FN scroll wheel. That puts you in game mode, and that also disables the Windows key. Now, if I was to press X normally, you can see it's outputting X just fine. However, if I wanted to use the Easy Shift function, I will press caps lock X. In my case, that opens the control panel, but you can decide what you want to do with that. Now, you can choose whatever function you want in Swarm, the keyboard software that you're looking at now. And you can also create your own macros, which didn't work for me, so that's unfortunate. Secondly, Swarm has to be opened for any of your macros to work. For whatever reason, they refuse to save, even though this keyboard has onboard memory. And that's also the case for your RGB settings as well. Thirdly, and you can see this from this picture, the RGB that's on the keyboard doesn't actually match what's being displayed on the software. Basically, every single keyboard software does this, so why not this one? Lastly, not every key is Easy Shift compatible. Basically, anything to the right from the B key cannot be programmed, which is really disappointing. Now, this keyboard has other features like a detachable magnetic wrist rest, shortcuts on the F keys, and RGB lights dimming after a few minutes of inactivity, which is actually really nice. Overall, the feature set is a mishmash of good intentions and questionable execution, but it is missing a lot of other things like per key RGB customization and a USB pass-through, which would have been appreciated, so I can't really give it more than a 7 out of 10. Now, as you can see, the RGB really stands out given the floaty keycap design. They kind of remind me of pudding keycaps, and this would have been very impressive in 2019, and it is still today. Although this is the white model, so bear that in mind. However, what isn't the best is the lock light implementation. For example, if I press caps lock, you can see the other lock lights partially lighting up, which ruins the aesthetic of the keyboard. Also, I couldn't quite get 100% comfortable gaming on these given the wear and tear on the left shift key, which felt different from the rest of the keys. Overall, it has a few issues here and there, and I do wish some of its features were more streamlined, but it wasn't too bad as a whole. 6 out of 10. Now, it's worth reminding you that this is a mechanical keyboard based on the MX design, which are known to be very reliable, so I have no doubts the switches will last for decades. The cable is also braided, which makes them more durable, especially if you're the type to move your keyboard around a lot. Although I can't say the same about the RGB LEDs or the keycaps, these will definitely need to be replaced at some point in the future, especially the keycaps, which I think is their main weak point here. Overall, even though MX based switches have failed on me in the past, they're still very reliable, but not as reliable as Hall effect switches. 7 out of 10. Now, you probably already know this keyboard isn't worth the £150 asking price, so what are the alternatives? Well, the closest to this keyboard is the Keychron K10 Wireless or the K10 Pro. Both have basically the same features as this keyboard and more for less money. But what if you still want to buy one of these? Firstly, I wouldn't recommend it. However, if you happen to find one for let's say £30 or so, then you can consider it, but only then. Overall, there are plenty of alternatives on the market. Don't buy one of these at full price. Seriously. 1 out of 10. Now let's move on to the switch characteristics. On-center key presses are very smooth with almost zero scratchiness or inconsistency at very slow key presses. Off-center key presses are a little bit scratchier with more noticeable inconsistencies, but only at very slow key presses. Overall, they're a decently smooth switch, an upgrade from the Cherry MX Brown, especially back then, but it isn't anything special now. 7 out of 10. Now, according to Roccat, these switches have an actuation point of 1.8mm and a total travel of 3.6mm. Now, as you can see from this force curve I recorded, the Rock and Titan Tactile were within its outline specs. They were also very consistent with neither of the three switches showing major deviations from one another. TTC really did a good job here. Now here's a force curve comparison between the Roccat Titan Tactile and the Cherry MX Brown. The Titan switch has an earlier tactile bump and less total travel. The Titan's tactility is also slightly stronger and sharper compared to the MX Brown, although this is barely noticeable when actually using them. Now here it is against the Acco POM Brown. The two switches don't look similar at first, but both their tactile strength and sharpness are very similar despite them having different weightings. Overall, the Titan switches have a light weighting and excellent consistency performance. They're too light for my preferences, but they're a decent alternative to the MX Brown as long as you don't mind spending money on a Roccat keyboard. 6 out of 10. Now, they sound subpar. I think the cheaply made keycaps and the open floating switch design is to blame here. Plus, the switches ping on the upstroke and the stabilizers are rattly as well. Overall, sound was definitely not a top priority when Roccat was designing this keyboard. Then again, this was the case with many gaming keyboards of its time. 4 out of 10. Now take a listen and enjoy. Now, apart from their excellent consistency, they feel like any other brown switch on the market. They're lightly weighted and feature a weak tactile bump. Additionally, I'm not a fan of lightly weighted switches such as these, so these fall outside of my preferences. Overall, it would have been nice to see some innovation from Roccat here, but these aren't anything new, although it is a decent MX Brown alternative. 5 out of 10. Now, I couldn't feel their tactility during slow or fast-paced gaming, which was to be expected for a Cherry MX Brown clone. However, just like with typing, their consistency was top-notch, which made gaming that much more pleasant, unlike the scratchy and inconsistent Cherry MX Brown. Overall, these personally wouldn't be my top choice for gaming, but I have to admit that they're far from the worst out there. 6 out of 10. In conclusion, it's a fairly standard switch in a fairly standard keyboard, but with a premium price tag. I'm glad we've mostly moved away from this. The final score for this keyboard is 28 out of 50 or 56%, only slightly above average. The final score for this switch is 28 out of 50 or 56%, which again is also slightly above average. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I haven't done a keyboard review in over 4 years, but I'm getting back into it. I do have more interesting keyboards to show you. Next time I'll be looking at another keyboard. Until then, take care and goodbye.